This is Alex Rink with Mike Potter, the CEO and co-founder of Rewind, originally based in Ottawa, but now growing and hiring all over the place. Rewind backs up SaaS applications and is especially well known in the e-commerce space, as well as some other areas that Mike can get into. I've had the privilege of investing in and working with Mike for a couple of years and being able to see the company's growth. And one of the things that Mike has been very keen on from very early on has been company culture. Clearly reaping the benefits of that focus. Rewind has a 4.9 rating based on a number of ratings on Glassdoor, 100% CEO approval, and the product that Rewind has, just looking at, for example, Shopify App Store has a 4.8 rating based on 778 reviews based on my check this morning. It's got a 4.5 rating on G2 Crowd. So high quality product and very happy and productive team. Wanted to talk to Mike about growth and culture and the synergies between them. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Alex. Great to talk to you.
Anything you want to share about background of the company, and maybe relate it back to sort of growth and culture? When you first started up the company, how much were you even thinking about culture? How did you get started, and how did you start to cultivate the kind of culture that you were looking for?
Let's see. I think the other parts that might be relevant would be knowing that when we first started, James and I so James is my co-founder. I don't think we mentioned that just yet, but James Shashelsky, who co-founded the company, we started Rewind in 2015, and we didn't work full-time on it until February of 2017. So it was basically 18 months of two jobs for both of us. We go work full-time during the day, come home at night, put the kids to bed. They're all a little bit older now, but put the kids to bed, and then get on at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and then work till 12, 1 in the morning, and rinse and repeat that. I mean, it wasn't every day, but it was a lot of the days of the week where we were doing that. I think that that certainly helped inform some aspects of our culture that I think we'll probably talk about in terms of like our focus on making sure that people have a real good work-life balance. The other part that may be relevant would be my first startup. When we first met each other, you and I happened to be raising at the same time, and so we'd meet each other at all these different fundraising events, and that startup didn't work out. It wasn't a financial success for me, but I'd say I learned a lot in running that business. And I think a lot of the culture that we've built into the company, or a lot of the processes that we built in the company, come out of some of the failures that we've had there. I think, getting to your question of culture is really interesting. I've always looked at it and said, I can't understand why. I've always looked and said, like, if a tech company has an average attrition rate of like 10% of its employees, it seems like if you built a company that had a lower attrition rate, that's something that I think would be reasonable in the sort of 2 to 5% range, you'd have this like immense competitive advantage over a long period of time, because more of your employees would have stayed longer. They understand how the business works, they understand how the product works, they don't need to be retrained. You get all these benefits. And so as we looked at building this company, and you mentioned like we do backups, like this is not, we are not building a technical moat by any means of imagination, right? We're doing backups of SaaS applications. The data that we have access to is pretty much data that anyone else has access to. I think we're starting to build a bit of a moat in terms of how many platforms we get to. But we've always looked and said the company has to compete on a different level other than its technical abilities. And building a great place to work for me was always a way that you compete as a technology company. And so it's always been a goal of ours to build a great place to work. That's been a goal of Rewind since we first started the company when we went full time in 2017, was I just wanted to make this a place where people really want to work. And I think that's really been a focus of Rewind. It's still a focus to this day. And like you said, at least there's indications that we're doing a good job in doing that.
Yeah, now the company's actually grown tremendously in the course of the last few years. As you said, since you started really being full time. I mean, maybe it was growing tremendously before, but maybe people weren't really aware of it as you were, doing the side hustle thing, nights and weekends. But has been growing tremendously over the course of the last 3 years. You just raised a big round of financing, and more importantly, the fundamentals have been, in terms of number of customers and revenues and, cash generation, et cetera, have been really trending positively. So it's interesting to hear how you are both focused on building a product that people would appreciate and get value out of, but by the same token, also considering what the culture was going to be like. So how would you describe the culture at Rewind, and what are some distinctive elements that you're especially proud about?
I think there's a culture of accountability at Rewind. There are processes that we've put in place that ensure accountability for employees. We have one process that we run every week. It's called a 15 in 5 update, where at the end of the week, you have to write up, you spend 15 minutes writing. That would take somebody a few minutes to read. So 15 minutes to write, 5 minutes to read. And you write an update about, what did you accomplish? Not what did you do, but what did you accomplish? What did you learn? And what are you working on next week? Like what's your focus for next week? And it sounds really simple. I mean, I've done that, for 10 or 15 years in a row. I used to do it at Adobe. I found it would really help me at quarter end and year end, as you went into reviews with your manager, to be able to point out, like, here are the things that I did in the first few weeks of the quarter, or here's what I accomplished in the first few quarters of the year, because people tend to have a sort of a short memory. And that process really ensures accountability. It's and I love it because it's something that everyone has to do, and you can't hide from it. At the end of the week, you're writing down and sharing with the rest of the company, what did you accomplish this week? And we've certainly had, some employees who've come in and missed their 15 in 5s. And listen, like, everybody misses one, right? But if you miss one, your manager has a discussion with you, you miss a second one, you miss a third one, it becomes pretty clear really quickly that that you're not accomplishing, what you set out to do. And so that's one process, I think, that that we've built that just reinforces that culture of accountability. The other value that we've got, which is, I think, not very typical in a startup, is encouraging work-life balance. We really believe that people can get their job done in 8 hours a day. We think it's important that people take time off and escape from work. This is not a manufacturing plant. It is not simply input equals output, as it is for manufacturing lines. This is creative work in some cases, solving problems. And there are countless examples where, at least personally, where I've been trying to solve a problem, I work way too long on it, don't get anywhere, take some time off, just go home, go to bed, wake up the next morning and solve it in like 5 or 10 minutes, right? And I think we're really big believers that focus on work-life balance, and not asking employees to work 10-hour days or 12-hour days, that we want to encourage them to get out and get involved in their community and find other activities that they're looking for, is a reason why we're successful. And I think a lot of people might look at that and say, well, imagine if you can do that in 8 hours, what would you be able to do in 10 hours or 12 hours? Like, if you had just worked a little bit harder, what would you accomplish? And we just see it as the opposite, that focus on 8-hour work days has enabled us to be successful, because it gives us time off to stop, to think, to refresh, and to make sure that when we're at work, we're accomplishing as much as we can. So I think those two in particular are two aspects of our culture that I'm like really proud of, because I think they're a bit different. Well, maybe not the accountability, but I think the work-life balance is a bit different than what people would typically expect of a startup of our size, and the growth that we've seen.
Right. Okay, great. And what about aligning everyone around a common sort of goal? You mentioned, all right, so got this, new product. It's doing really well in the market. We've got this culture of accountability, creating a better work-life balance for people. But there's still the issue about getting everybody aligned in the same direction. So, we hear a lot about sort of like purpose and vision and mission and values. How intentional have you been about putting those in place? And have they been sort of, have you been like from the very beginning sort of, hey, let's kind of establish what these are? Or have you let the company grow for a while and then kind of call people together and say, where are we now and what do we look like? And what do we want to look like going forward? How do you think about those?
I think early on we didn't think too much about mission and vision. It was just let's continue building these great apps. So we started on Shopify, but we quickly expanded to cover BigCommerce and QuickBooks Online. And really the focus was never really to be like the backup tool of choice for all SaaS applications. And I think you've impacted that vision. We work with an executive coach as well, who has helped. And I think as the company grew in size, and I'm going to say it's somewhere around like 10, 15 people, we were maybe like, let's just keep executing on what we're on. But past that, it seemed like that was when we started to focus on this bigger vision of, hey, wait a minute, we've seen success on Shopify and BigCommerce and QuickBooks. What if we had this vision of like backing up all SaaS services, and what would that look like? And I think as the company's grown, there's a couple of things I really like about this business. One is its simplicity of just like, backing up the cloud. Everyone knows what a backup is. You don't kind of have to explain what the product does or its features or anything like that, or why somebody would need a backup. Everybody kind of gets it. And so you can really focus on this vision of like, okay, so yeah, we're doing these 3 now, but if we did, 100 in 5 years, what would that look like? And I think that we needed that from this, from 20 people on sort of thing, which was when we ended up coming together and working on it. We did come together and work on it, but I don't think the vision of the team wasn't something that I went out and asked people about, like, what should we do? I'm not too big of a believer that you should be getting too much input into that. I don't know. I'm more of a, this is what I think we should be doing. I'll take some input, but I don't want this to feel like it's a democracy where everybody gets a vote on what we should be doing, and it can derail you on all these different angles. I think you need to be a bit more firm in saying, no, this is what I want. Like, this is what I think we should be doing. And let's talk about that. But these are the guardrails that we're putting inside, right? Like we're going to be focused on this particular aspect. We're going to be focused on backups. We can talk about mission and vision in terms of that, but those guardrails are kind of set. I think a session where those guardrails would have been removed would have been a bit of a disaster, where everyone's got an opinion and you can go in all sorts of different ways. So we have had those sessions. We worked together on them, but I think if I was being honest, I probably largely took over those sessions in terms of where I thought the company should be going.
Got it. But you feel like the team responded well to the sort of guidance and direction that you were giving in that regard?
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest, right? I think success helps, right? So as we've built a company that's growing 100% year over year, it's like, well, who am I to argue with what's going on, sort of thing. So I do think I'm not naive enough to think that that it's like me and this big vision. I do think a part of it is you look back and say, well, this has been extremely successful so far, and so who are we to say that there's not this massive opportunity out there? And there, as we get into the market, there's other companies and competitors that are executing a similar strategy. So you can start to say, like, well, look at these people. Like, these are other companies that are out here executing the same strategy with the same vision. So we're not alone in this. This is going to be a big market, and you can sort of build it a bit that way. But yeah, I would say I probably largely led the round of, or largely led the discussions around, like, okay, what is this company here for? What do we want to be in, 5 years or 10 years?
Got it. So you mentioned the growth, obviously, and people could see, you get the positive reinforcement of, hey, this is going well. Everybody's looking for great talent there, especially for tech companies. I mean, there's just incredibly challenging to find, let's say the level of fit that you're looking for, whether it be in terms of technical competence or cultural fit, or the combination of those two. So how do you go about finding and attracting the best people? And by best, I mean best for Rewind.
Yeah, well, I think so. We've always looked at alignment to values. So we have 6 corporate values that we've put in place that we feel accurately represent the kind of company that we are and the kind of company that we want to be. As an example, one of those is being open and honest. So we're open and honest with our employees. We're open and honest about what the product can do. And I remember interviewing somebody who was coming in for a marketing position, and they were selling things on Amazon, and they had set up these emails that had gone out to employee or to their customers, trying to get their customers to leave reviews. And they loved, or they'd set up these sort of A/B tests where they were testing messaging on which one drove more reviews. And they'd found that the one that drove more reviews was when they mentioned that they had a family, which wasn't true. Like, they didn't have a family. It was just a single person that was selling stuff on Amazon. But they found that when they said that they had a family, that they got way more reviews, and that was the best response. And I remember looking and saying, well, that's a fantastic story. Like, I think you're a great marketer. I think I love that you're testing new messaging. Like, that's exactly what we're looking for. But we've got this value of being honest, and you're not being honest in the emails that you're sending out. And so we can't hire you for that reason. And so I think that's our first kind of check, really, is like an alignment on values. And I think that's helped us a lot. It's helped us when we've had to let people go who we've mishired on, and we've missed those values, or people change and no longer abide by the values that we have. But those have really guided a lot of our hiring decisions. And I think when I first started, I wasn't sure as to how important those would be. And as we've grown, I now understand the importance of really writing down, like, here's what the company believes and here's what we expect out of people, and making sure that people understand those values, that they abide by those values, that they live those values, that that's an accurate description of what it's like to work at the company and what the company wants to be like, and basing hiring decisions around those. Well, I mean, really any decision, to be honest with you. Hiring's one, but they're meant to be there so that when people have uncertainty around what they should be doing, they can just look at the values and say, well, this is my guiding, like, these are my guideposts of like what I should be working on.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question. I think it hopefully did.
Yeah, no, that's great. So obviously challenging to find the right people and bring on the right people, especially during this time of COVID. So what kinds of things are you doing in order to get people onboarded, if you like, you hires on board with the company as quickly as possible, both from assimilating on the, let's say, more functional or technical elements of the role, as well as the personal fit and having them feel connected?
So that's a really good question, right? I think it's extremely difficult these days to do what we've done, which is essentially double the size of the company from about 30 people to 65 over the course of a pandemic without being able to meet people in person, and yet have an engagement score of about 8.4 out of 10, and an ENPS that's in the 70s or 80s. And so, hats off to Kirsty, who's our head of people. We don't refer to people as resources, so we don't use human resources at Rewind. She's head of people. And the work that she's done in building an onboarding program to make sure that people get that sense of camaraderie. There are, I can't go into all the details about what we do, to be honest, on their first day. I know she spends a lot of time with them on their first day. She's implemented onboarding programs for each department. There's a checklist of items that we add into. We use a software called Bamboo HR. So Bamboo they end up with a checklist of like, here are the people that you should be talking to and meeting. My involvement in that is really actually coming in. For each new hire, I go in and I talk about mission, vision, and values for an hour on their first day. So that's really important for me that I do that. I don't let her do that. Well, I don't let her do that. I think it's important that the CEO come in and talk about, you know, what the values are of the company, what we believe in, and that they hear from me that, you know, if you see stuff that we're doing that is against these values, that I want to know about it. Or Kirsty, you can tell Kirsty, or you can tell your manager, whoever it happens to be, but I don't want you to be silent. And so that generally takes about an hour. There's also the opportunity that for them to you know, ask me any questions about the company or the history or like really anything that they want. And then within their first 2 weeks, we do a team meeting every 2 weeks as a group on Zoom. So we used to do these in person, and then afterwards we would bring lunch in and we'd all eat together. But every 2 weeks we have a team meeting. So at the very least, you know, within their first 10 days of work, they're going to have a session on Zoom where they can see every team member. And then as part of those sessions, we do something we call 4,000 words, where they pick 4 pictures that mean something to them, and they introduce themselves through their 4,000 words. And so every new employee does their 4,000 words and sort of presents in front of the company. So that's some of the stuff that we do to try and bring people in and feel like they're part of the team. Like I said, the 15 and 5s are another good way. You know, I see a lot of new hires who, you know, in their first week post, you know, whatever I was reading, I was learning, I was coming up to speed on this, and employees just come in with words of encouragement, like, hey, great job, you know, like, way to go, glad to have you on the team. And I just think that that's the kind of culture and camaraderie that really helps you feel like, okay, like I'm part of something special, right? I'm posting, I'm seeing what everyone else is working on. Like one of the things that was really big when we were first starting, like one of the things James will often talk about is, you know, he had a lot of people who asked him, or he asked to start a company. Like James really wanted to do this part-time thing, and he would ask people, and they'd say, yeah, you know, I'm really interested in it, and it would go nowhere. And then he asked me, and I was like, yeah, I think I asked him or whatever, but you know, I'm like, yeah, I'm in. Like, let's work on this. Let's do something in our spare time. And as opposed to me waiting for him to do something, he says a story where he's like, you know, I remember going back to Mike like a week later, and it's like, okay, so like, what do you think? And then I'm like, okay, well, I've registered a domain name, I've got a website going, I've started this email list, and I'm starting to build a product. And he would feel like, oh shit, like if Mike's doing that, then I need to do something. So then I'd say like, so what are you working on? He'd be like, oh, I'm, you know, getting the framework of the website going. I'm starting to build the initial integrations. I'm building the proof of concept, whatever the technical part was. And we kind of go back and forth like this. And having that, it's not competition, but having that coworker that is pushing you to work and to get stuff done, like it really helps. And so I think that's a bit of what those 15 and 5s do, where you know, you post like, hey, I'm doing all this great work here, coming up to speed on what to do, and then you read everyone else and all the stuff that they're accomplishing, and you just get this feeling of like, wow, like everybody really works hard here. And then when you see the results, you start thinking like, wow, like everybody's working hard, and they're clearly working on the right things. And so I think you come up to speed pretty quickly on how things operate. And for me, the key to that is all the stuff that's ingrained in internal processes that are required by people, and it's reinforcing that value of accountability. And anytime you can get a process that reinforces a value, I think it's like a gold mine.
Great. So let's talk about career development, performance reviews, and so on. One of the things is that as you've probably seen with millennials, especially, or a set of millennials, but frankly, I think it applies to everyone, is frequently looking for feedback. And how am I doing? Am I doing the right sorts of things? Am I doing well? How do you approach the whole area of performance reviews and seeing where someone's at, and coaching and mentoring, and and frankly identifying great performance versus non-performance? Talk about your philosophy there.
Yeah, I think so. Generally speaking, I'm not a fan of annual reviews. I was at Adobe 10 years ago when they got rid of the annual review process and replaced it with a constant check-in, which is what I really think companies should be doing. So there's no annual review process at Rewind. Kersey has come in and implemented a performance management system that kind of mimics what we had at Adobe. And I think it's good. I will say I think there's lots of room for improvement. I think generally speaking, managing, coaching, when you're growing as quickly as we are, and people are being asked to do so much, that's probably the one area that gets neglected the most. And so we're now in a situation in the company where I feel like we're bringing in people managers or directors that will take care of some of the performance management aspects that are needed. So we're just kind of starting with that. But in terms of what we do, so managers are encouraged to have weekly or bi-weekly check-ins with all of their employees. I think we've managed to keep that for the most part. There's been some people who have been a bit stretched in with like too many direct reports and maybe missed some, but for the most part, I think we've done an okay job of that. Generally speaking, those meetings should be discussing performance on a regular basis. Again, there's been some situations where I've heard feedback that that doesn't always happen. People start to get focused on some of the activities that people are doing instead of talking about performance. But Kersey's come in and tried to make sure that those conversations are happening and guaranteed to happen. So we've implemented quarterly goals where employees are being asked to set, in cooperation with their manager, being asked to set quarterly goals and objectives for themselves. There's a review session at the end of the quarter on how those are going. It's expected that in their weekly or bi-weekly one-on-ones that they'll talk about progress towards those goals. I think this is just stuff that as the company has grown into 65 people that we're at now, on our way to 100, you need some of these more formal processes to make sure that everybody's kind of aligned on what they should be working on and aligned and understanding how their success contributes to the company's success. So all of their individual goals roll up into departmental goals. All those departmental goals roll up into corporate objectives. There's a fairly clear line between what you're working on and what you're, how you're contributing to the success of the company. You're doing weekly or bi-weekly one-on-ones. You're doing quarterly reviews of those goals. Yeah, and I think that's mainly, I guess, how we're doing performance management now. Like I said, it gets a bit stressed, I think, as the company. As some people have too many people that are reporting to them, and sometimes you can't always do one-on-ones with as many people as you'd like. And we certainly heard early on, and early on I mean like 2 years ago, that people really wanted that performance management aspect. Like they wanted to know how they were doing in their job. They wanted that review, and so there's I think what we've put in place, it matches a lot of what I had at Adobe, and I think it's exactly what people are looking for. It's that regular feedback, no annual review cycle, but a constant check-in, quarterly goals, and we'll be implementing a performance management program that'll financially recognize those goals as well.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk about, the company's grown very well, great culture. To what extent have those been synergistic for you? And have there ever been occasions where you felt like you had to prioritize growth over culture or culture over growth?
I think we certainly prioritized culture over growth for a little bit. Like I definitely think that there was an aspect of the company early on where we were hesitant to raise enough, where we were hesitant to raise funds, right? Like when you and I first met 2.5 years ago, I think I remember saying, like, there's very few companies that can really be venture backed, and this, I think, is one of them. Like, you saw the potential immediately. Took us a while, I think, to come around to what you saw. But a lot of the decisions we were making at that time were to make sure that it was a company that we really wanted to work at. Like, we were prioritizing the company that we wanted to build versus what maybe a typical sort of VC startup was like. And I think as we got along further in the process and we had more success, we were able to raise money and being very clear to investors on what our culture was like, right? Like, I shared our company values, and we have an employee onboarding document that describes those values in detail. I shared those with these latest round of investors to make sure that they know, like, listen, like, one of the things that's really important for us is that we encourage our employees to work, 8-hour days. So if you're expecting, people to be responding to you on the weekends or at night, in the middle of the night, like, this is probably not a good investment for you. And as you see more success, you're able to, I think, to define, to find investors who are aligned to your values, as opposed to trying to bend the company to the values of the investors that you took on. So I think we did prioritize culture over growth. I think as I look back, I'm pretty happy that we did that, because I think it's allowed us to keep the culture as we've grown, and to make sure that nobody is dictating, what are the values for the company and how do we want to behave. We're very confident in what we're doing. We've proven out that that we can build a great company with these values that grows at an extremely high rate of growth. And we don't need to compromise on our values in order to do that. So I definitely think we did it. But I think as I look back now, I'm pretty happy that we did. I think it's worked out really, really well for us.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And I remember as we were going over potential funders and VCs and so on, you're making a point of, hey, these values need to be front and center. I do think it's worth just noting for, I guess, the audience, that you had the luxury or benefit of being a company that was performing extremely well. And that tends to give one more choice when speaking with a variety of different VCs. And so there are more that maybe come to the table, and you can use that as a filter. So really, you can imagine it might be a little bit different if someone really talked about culture and didn't have the growth to back it up. But obviously you did, and that's worked out super well. So you're only kind of like 3 years into this journey so far, or 5 years if you think about the original starting. So knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would do differently if you were starting over, or that you would tell yourself from 3 to 5 years ago, or that you'd put out there for other people who are starting up their companies, just in terms of striking that balance and optimizing for growth and culture?
Yeah, so I tend to, nobody likes asking me these questions because I tend to never answer it, because I really try and not second guess any decision that I've made, because I just don't see the point in going back and saying if I had done anything differently. I think we made the best decision that we could every step of the way. Otherwise, we would have made a different decision. So I never really I don't spend a lot of time going back and thinking about what if. I find that a waste of time. But I think I do think that we did things in the right kind of order. I will say, like, this is my second startup, right? We talked about the first one when you were raising money and when I was raising money, and the failure there really helped me on this one. So I think that's been super important, and I think that's why I don't second guess anything I did in the first startup either, even though it wasn't necessarily a complete success, because it helped me learn. I think I'd look at this the same way. So if you're asking me, like, what would I encourage people to do, I'd say if you're at that point where you haven't defined your mission, vision, and values, that really is important as you're growing. I don't think it's super important in the 5 to 10 people stage where you're just trying to figure stuff out. I think you can get by without it. But if you really want to build a fast growing startup and a company that people really want to work at, that's going to be, a major employer in your city, I think you have to spend the time to work on that mission, vision, and values. And I think I didn't realize the importance of them until we did them. And then once I did them, I could see people implementing them all over the place. I saw my support team implementing, delight our customers. I saw product managers coming to me and saying, like, I didn't know what to do in this situation. So I just looked at our values and I thought, well, this sort of aligns with this value. So I did this. We fired people who weren't aligned with our values, who weren't necessarily performing well and who weren't aligned with our value of accountability or open and honesty. We've made hiring decisions based on that. Like a lot of what the company has done, I think, has been aligned to that mission, vision, and values. So I wouldn't say I probably wouldn't do it differently, but I do think that if you're in that position and you're looking for advice and you're in that like 10 people and you're growing at a good rate and you're going to be 20 people one day, whether it's in a year or 2 years or 3 years, like you should spend some time on that. It's really important. It's hard to overstate, I think, the importance of it. And this is coming from somebody who's like an engineer who like would much prefer to be working on numbers and math problems and things like that, as opposed to the sort of softer skills. But that's the one thing where I was surprised at how big of an impact working on that had to the business.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mike. So I think we'll call it a wrap for today. Rewind.com, protecting businesses and SaaS businesses, especially by backing up their SaaS applications. If you are looking for a role at this very rapidly growing, very well funded, and very well regarded from a cultural perspective company, rewind.com, lots of roles that are available. Thanks again, Mike.
You're welcome, Alex. Thanks.
Great. Cheers.